Hello, I am Mudita, and welcome back to Satisfactory. If you are new here, welcome! I was looking for a challenge to spice up a new playthrough, and I decided to load balance everything and make some videos for the wonderful people on YouTube. There are 0 manifolds in this world. This is episode 30 of the load balance playthrough, and today I'm going to show off how I make 20 assembly director systems per minute. This was the first factory that just really hurt my brain, and I had to take a couple breaks for a couple days, play some other games. Which is important. If it starts to feel like too much, it is just a game. You have to remember that. Unfortunately, my computer also needed a few breaks, and the game crashed about 5 times in trying to start this factory up. We will all just have to cross our fingers and hope I can finish this playthrough. This is going to be a more in-depth tour, and I'll break down how I did most of the load balancing. And then we can watch this beautiful nightmare come to life. I have all the alternate recipes. I'm going to utilize the copper alloy ingot, pure caterium ingot, steamed copper sheet, solid steel ingot, fused wire, fused quick wire, insulated cable, silicon circuit board, silicon high-speed connector, and the caterium computer alt recipes. These are a great combination of recipes that are a bit more efficient than the default ones. I know the pure copper ingot recipe would have been more efficient in terms of copper ore, however it costs about 3 times the power compared to the alloy recipe. I don't imagine I'll run out of iron ore, but the extra power is disappearing quickly, so this is more efficient for me. I'm going to be using these nodes here. Normally this is where I would go through all the different blueprints that I'll be using. However, there's quite a few and that would take up quite a bit of time. So I'll highlight them as I go through the different parts of the factory. And if you're curious about how any of them are built, I have another series that goes through all of the different blueprints I'm using, and they're all available for free through Google Drive. So let me just give you a brief overview of what's going on and where. So out in the distance, we can zoom in and we can see the 2 towers, or bases of the towers right there. Those are both the caterium nodes that I'll be using. If we pan over to here, you can just barely see the concrete top of that one right there. That's going to be the iron node that's going to combine with that coal node to make steel. Going to be using both of those quartz nodes for the silica. Right here we have more iron and coal that's going to be making the rest of the steel pipes that we need. And if we scroll over here, like I mentioned, I'm using the copper alloy ingot recipe, so these two are going to get paired together to make copper ingots. So out there in the distance, we're going to overclock all 3 of the normal copper nodes, and I'll need half of that same amount in iron, so I'll be using those 2 iron nodes out there. And as you can see, we've got the train set up already. So I've got my personal one set up, and then we've got the second one that's going to bring in all of the imports. So I'm going to use this to bring in the 2700 rubber and the 560 plastic. I'll be using a drone to bring in the heavy modular frames. And like always for these projects, I've got my handy dandy mobile storage with the drone port on top so I can have all of my parts delivered. And this is just a gigantic time saver. The amount of materials this is going to go through and the amount of time this takes, I didn't have to go back to my main storage once. And this is about a 60-hour project. So now let me build up some towers and let's go from there. And now the towers are built. And you can see my trains are already running. I wanted to make sure that the throughput was fine for both the plastic and the rubber. So that's just sinking underneath instead of over there. So this video is going to be a little bit different, and I'm going to give you a little peek behind the scenes here. I'm using the same methodology as some of the bigger Satisfactory YouTubers. And I basically build the factory and create multiple save points. So I have ones that are clearly labeled and then kind of the ones in between where I just needed to save the game. So this allows me to build the whole factory, get everything in the right places, and then have save points, and then I basically just go back and then I recreate what I did. Earlier, when I was first starting, all of those starting factories were so small, it was just the easiest thing, and it made everything really smooth. And once I got to some of the bigger factories like plastic and creating power with oil and all that sort of a thing, it still wasn't bad because I could just build half of it and then skip ahead. Now, unfortunately, this is just such an involved process. If I wanted to do that, I would have needed to build the whole thing a little bit different. And if I were to do this differently, the way I would do it, as I would have made one video where I put everything in all of these towers and basically had that as one whole video, flipped the switch, got those all brought into the main factory and had those syncing, and then did the main tower as a second video. Unfortunately, I thought of that way too late, and I think I mentioned earlier, this is a over 60-hour in-game time project. And once I realized that's probably how I should have done this video, I was just in way too deep. So I apologize, this is going to be more of a broad overview. But for the next factory, I'll try to break it up into at least 2 pieces, so I can get back to actually showing off building some of it. But this was basically the next step, so I've got all of the towers in place. The Caterium just have a bus that's going to bring those over. I'm going to have a whole bunch of refineries all on this floor. And then I've got this bus, but this isn't quite where I want it. I'm going to move this over. I realized once I placed the machines that it should be a little bit more centralized. But this bus of 8 belts will be bringing in the total of 4,700 copper ingots. And just like that, all the machines are placed. So let's go through the farthest towers and we'll work our way back to the main one. So I'm using both of these iron nodes. One is going to be clocked to 600, so that is going to feed both of these. And then this one here is only clocked to 300. And that one is going to snake around here and feed that tower. So inside here, we've got 2 miners, and each of them are clocked to 600. So the easiest way I could think of was to just split it right here, and then have each of those feed a separate floor. So with each miner putting out 600, and it's going to get combined with essentially 300, that one's going to get split in half, that one matches up with that 600. I needed 12 foundries, so the easiest way to do it would be to put 4 on each floor. Obviously this tower has 8 because it's using 2 identical setups, they're just right next to each other. So the iron can feed both halves, each copper miner is feeding 1/2 of this tower. Just using the simple 2 foundry blueprint. So this was a nice easy start. All of the machines are clocked to 100%, and then I have it all being grouped up here. Unfortunately, unless I wanted to do it much lower or much higher, this was just the convenient height to match both of them. In hindsight, I probably could have moved that one up like a meter or 2 and made this whole thing a little bit simpler without having to do this little thing. But I just pretend I don't see it most of the time. I also put just a portrait sign on the back to kind of cover up that hole, because I wanted this to be on this side. So when I merge these 2 belts with the bus, they all fit conveniently. They all run down here, and then we get lifted up a little bit higher, because now this is the height that it's going to enter in the factory. And then at this point we add the last 2 belts. So these first 6 belts all have 600 each. These last 2 are how I added the kind of random amount that I needed. We've got the iron node clocked at a really convenient 275.17 and probably some other decimal points. And then we have the copper node clocked to 550 and 1/3. So just like the other towers, really easily, you just split it in 3. Each one of those belts will feed each floor with 4 foundries. And then these are clocked to a super convenient number, but this ends up giving me the last 1100 and 2/3 of an ingot that I need for the factory. Moving on to the first of the steel towers, we've got the coal node. It's only clocked to 300. If we come up here, we've got the iron node, which I clearly haven't plugged up yet, but this is also clocked to 300. Nice thing with the steel and steel pipes, everything are nice round numbers, so all of these are clocked to 100% because I'm using the solid steel ingot. So we're making iron ingots first, combine that with the coal to make the solid steel ingots. This is where we had to do a little bit of underclocking. I need a total of 900 steel pipes. So I've got 2 floors of the foundries making the steel, and then we've got 3 floors making the steel pipes. So I just combine all of the steel pipes and then split it into 3. And then each one of these will feed a floor of constructors. So on each floor for the constructors, just using the 5 constructor blueprint, these are all clocked to 100%. And then the finished product, which I haven't belted up quite yet, will run somewhere along here. And then into the main factory there, after merging up with the bus that'll hold all of this. So here's another steel tower. So the reason this one is a little bit bigger, we're using double the amount, and thus it has twice the machines. So first step, making all of the iron ingots, and then we're going up to the steel. So the easiest way I found to do this was I did the 5 smelter blueprint 4 times. So that's my 20 machines, and I believe they are all clocked to 100%. So since I had 2 floors, and I need to feed 3 floors of foundries, each floor has 5 foundries on it. So I just added one of my 2 to 3 load balancer blueprints, slap that down, so I could easily just take the 2 floors, even though they're the exact same, but it makes it an easy way to split it from 2 belts and make it 3 belts. Once you change what speed the belts are, they're no longer part of the blueprint. That's why they don't show up. So each one of these lifts feeds one of these floors with the iron ingots, which the iron is going to be coming on this belt right around from that one that's just hidden right behind there. And then because we have 3 floors of foundries and 3 floors of constructors doing the actual steel pipes, makes that part of belting really easy. Each one goes to a separate floor. All of these machines are also clocked to 100%. And again, just using more of the 5 constructor blueprint. And I clearly forgot some belts, so it's a good time to kind of go over this. So one of the things I like to do if I'm going to be splitting it 5 ways, because you're going to have to cycle back part of it, and I want to make sure that the belts have enough, so I find it easiest to work backwards instead of starting with knowing what's getting plugged in and going from there. I go from the machine and go backwards. So if each machine is going to intake 30 steel ingots, and we've got 3 off of each of these 2 splitters, this needs to hold 90. So I need a Mark II for here, which means this one also needs to be a Mark II, because this is splitting that one 3 ways. So if each of these need 90, that means this belt right here needs to be able to hold 180. So we need a Mark III on this belt. And that handles all of the belts for the 5-way split. So if 300 is getting plugged in, that means each one of these is 150. So Mark III. And that's all the steel pipes. So far, this is really easy. And if we come right over here, we've got 2 pure quartz nodes. So taking almost full advantage of these. So the way the numbers kind of worked out for this one, I need 2,554 silica, which means I needed 1532.4 raw quartz. So instead of doing, say, a full 780 on one and then leaving the random number to the other one, I thought it would be easiest just to split it in half, which means we have some fun underclocking with all of the machines as well. So each of these towers, even though they are kind of merged together, each of these floors has 6 constructors and there are 6 floors. So in total, there's 72 constructors. All of the machines are underclocked to this amount, so I'll show you how I get there. So the nice thing with doing the math in the clock speed is you could use the input or the output, whatever is more convenient. I'll just use the output. So I know I need 2,554 silica. I'm going to be using a total of 72 machines. We're going to divide that by the default rate of 37.5 and then multiply it by 100 to get the percentage. So belting this up was really easy. Right out of the miner for each of the towers, I have it going straight into a splitter. We're splitting it 3 ways equally. And then each one of those lifts will plug into another splitter, and it'll feed that floor and the one above it. And that's how we're feeding all 6 floors. Over here in the edge of the northern forest, I've got the 2 Caterium nodes. In total, I need 1,146 2/3 Caterium ore. So this one is clocked at 378 and the 2/3. And that one's just getting bussed over to here, meeting up with this tower, and then they're going to go right on over to the refineries. So I know this probably seems like a really random number, being 768, but I'll show you why. And here we are at the main tower, which, let me tell you, is going to get quite a bit taller. So here I have a row of 48 refineries, which are going to be doing the pure Caterium ingot. And with this recipe, they need 24 Caterium ore, and we're getting the 12 ingots. So the 24 Caterium ore is what we care about. So the pure node is extracting 768. If we divide that by the 24 that each one of these are going to take, that means I can load balance 32, which is a pretty convenient number to do load balancing with. And that's why this belt is the one that has 378 and the 2/3. I'll be able to load balance 32 machines with this one. This, I'll have to underclock them, but I'll be able to load balance through about 16 machines. And this is where the load balancing starts to get a little bit more interesting. And let me tell you, I learned quite a bit on this project. Load balancing on this scale is very interesting because you're obviously load balancing huge sections, but chances are you're doing multiples of those because most things are going to be on multiple belts because of the sheer volume you're dealing with. And the rest of this floor is going to be taken up by the 90 refineries that are going to be making the steamed copper sheet recipe. So I've still got quite a bit of the belt work to do, but I am using a 5 refinery kind of joint blueprint here. But to make that fit, I can't include the mergers. But that's fine, because doing a project like this, unfortunately not all of the copper sheets are going to the same place. So we'll have to get a little creative with that belt work. And I did wall off this bottom part because we are going to make good use of this area down here. I'm covering a good portion of the body of water right here, and that's going to be filled up with a bunch of water extractors to feed all of those refineries. And then other than that, I'm going to use this space to do a whole bunch of the load balancing. And let me tell you, it gets a little messy. But I promise, there's no clipping. So let me fast forward, and we'll go to the next step. And we're back. So we've fast forwarded quite a few hours here. First thing I did was move this bus from over here to right here. And now it's nice and centered. So the way the load balancing went for all of these refineries, each one of these groups is getting a belt of 450. The reason for that is since they intake 22.5 copper ingots, if I load balance them in groups of 20, it's a really easy 450 to work with. So that is the bulk of the machines being fed by 450 lines. The last two are doing the kind of random amount. So the last 204 copper sheets that I need will be split among these 5 and these 5. Out in the Dune Desert was really the first time that I used a logistics floor, and I got even more use out of it in this factory. So let's go downstairs and show you what I did. And this is where things start to get a little bit crazy. So, if I can get over here, I did add some labels to try to help myself out. The top 2 belts only have 550 and a third. The other 6 all have 600 a minute. So the easiest way to get those 400 lines is to take a 600 line, put it into a splitter. We split it in half, so 300 and 300. Split that one in half, so we've got 150 and 150. If we combine the 300 and the 150, I've got my 450. So load balancing those 4 lines was really easy and just sent them up right here. For the last bit, I needed 204, and for that, things got a little bit more interesting. So to get that 204 for the last 10 machines, I took another 600 belt, came over here, we split it in thirds, so 200, 200, and 200. 200 is going to go straight into that merger, so now I just need to split off 4. So the easiest way to do that would be to take the 200, divide it in half, now we've got 100. If we divide that by 5, we've got 20, divided by 5, we've got 4. So that's what I did. So we take the 200 into a splitter, there's 100, there's 100. If we take this over here, this is our 5-way split, so it goes into a merger first. And then from here, we need to split that in half. So this is essentially 3/5. This is the 2/5, which means that I need to cycle one of them back to that initial merger, leaving me with 1/5 here because the other one is being merged with everything else. So from here, now I've got my 20, and we're going to do that 5-way split again. So into the merger, splits in half. This is the 3/5. This is the 2/5, meaning we need to cycle one of them back. And now I'm realizing this is actually not supposed to be there. That would have given me 4 too many in the wrong direction. So I'll be honest, I'm pretty sure I solved this a slightly different way. But this would be the much simpler solution, and I wish I would have thought of that. If I just add some little short lifts in here, they fit, even though I've got my kind of short ceiling. Just make sure I delete those because you don't want the belt to connect to that instead of into the actual lift. And since the mergers and splitters are all on the same line, you get that nice right angle. So now this is 396. This has 4 coming out of it, meeting up with that 200, and we've got 204. How hard is that? Don't worry, the belting gets even worse. And if we come to the other end, we've got a bunch of water extractors and the pumps they need. So for this, really simple, nothing complicated. Most of these are going to be clocked to 240. I think these ones are clocked to 225. And then they're just going up and branching out to their respective machines. And now, let's move on to the bulk of the tower. I wish I would have thought of this sooner so I could have made these more permanent. And maybe I'll do something like this in the future. I think it's kind of nice. So on the first floor of manufacturing, we are going to be making wire and quick wire in some healthy amounts. So to do that, I'm using the fused wire and quick wire recipes. So we need both caterium ingots and copper ingots for both of these. The wire needs quite a bit less than the quick wire. As far as load balancing goes, each of these needed 60 assemblers. Originally, the plan for the wire was to load balance all 60 because each one of them are coming in on one belt. So that would be really easy, just throw it into a splitter and that would feed each row, right? And it would still give me a even number of 85 without a crazy decimal point to deal with. But once I got to the later stages, I realized 85 is just not a convenient number to work with. And so I definitely changed things up. So the way I am going to load balance this is the back 2 rows are all going to be clocked to 100%. So since each row has 20, and they're each going to be making 90 each, that row and this row will make 1800. And since I need 5100 total, and we take out the 3600 for the last 2 rows, that means this first row needs 1500. So that shouldn't be too bad. 1500 across 20 machines. Each one of these is going to be underclocked to 75 per minute. I'm going to do a real similar thing with the caterium. The back 2 rows are all going to be clocked to 100%, and this first row is going to deal with the remainder. So with these, they're each clocked to 62 per minute, so thankfully no crazy decimal points on this one either. Moving on to the next floor, we're going to be making the stators and cable. 6,000 cable. And again, this ended up being nice and even where there's 60 assemblers on one half, 60 assemblers on the other half. And this one is actually every machine is going to be clocked to 100%. All of the rows, all of the machines. So for the stators, I need the 900 steel pipes that I'll be bringing in from this tower and that tower. And then 2400 wire from down below. For the cable, I need 6,000. Now, using the default recipe, I would need 12,000 wire, and that sounds awful. So instead, I went with the insulated cable recipe, and now I only need 2,700 wire. I just need to bring in 1,800 rubber. So for those of you that have watched some of my videos and wondered why I made so much rubber, this is about half of it right here. And then load balancing across the 60 machines shouldn't be too bad. Both sides are in 3 rows of 20. And to get that, I just use 4 of the 5 assembler blueprint combo. Moving on to the 3rd floor. This entire floor is making automated wiring. So this is the 3rd floor of 120 assemblers. This one is laid out a little bit different. So the easiest way I found to do this, because all the machines are clocked to 100%, but they only output 2.5. However, they need 50 cable for each one. So the easiest way I could think of to do this was to split this into 10 groups of 12 machines. So I'm just using the 3 assembler blueprint. So I just have 4 of them next to each other to get my 12, and then 8 of them. So I'll have 2 groups. And then that way I can just plug in 30 stators and 600 cable into each of the 10 groups. And that'll spit out our 300 automated wiring. Moving on to floor 4. We are going to be making circuit boards and high-speed connectors. So to make 820 circuit boards, I'm using the silicon circuit board alt recipe. So I need 1804 copper sheets and the same amount of silica. So I went back and forth trying to figure out how exactly to load balance this. Took a little while, but what I settled on is that there are 4 groups of 16 assemblers. So I'm just using my 2 assembler blueprint. That's why they're spread out quite a bit. And I have 8 of those giving me 16. So there's 16. Here's 16, 16, 16. And all of these machines are going to be clocked to 100%. But unfortunately, that would still leave me shy of just 20. So to get the 20, I have just a compact version, mainly to keep this separate from the rest so I don't accidentally belt it up together in the future. But these are going to be the 2 that are underclocked to deal with that remainder. Heading back here, I've got 20 manufacturers to do the high-speed connectors. This worked out where they're all clocked to 100%. And the circuit boards and silica can each be load balanced across all 20 machines by themselves. However, for the quick wire, I'll need to split that into 4 belts to make feeding this a little bit easier. Moving on to floor number 5. We're going to be making 80 computers, 20 supercomputers, 40 AI limiters. So for the AI limiters, that's actually not too many. I only needed 8 machines, so that's going to be really easy to load balance. And I just need 200 copper sheets, 800 quick wire. Probably the easiest recipe of this whole thing. So to make 80 computers, I'm going to be using 24 manufacturers. So I've got 3 rows of 8. So load balancing shouldn't be too bad. I'll need 560 circuit boards, 960 rubber, and 2,240 quick wire. In this back right corner, I'll be making the supercomputers. So I've just got 12 manufacturers and they're facing each other because all of the amounts are small enough that they each come in on their own belt, making load balancing across all of them really easy. So I'll need half of the computers here. I'll need all of the AI limiters that we're making on this floor. I'll need all of the high-speed connectors that I'm making on the floor below. And this is where all of the plastic is going that I'm bringing in on the train. Moving on to the final floor. So this is where we finally make the adaptive control unit and the assembly director systems. So to make the first part, I need all of the automated wiring, the remaining 200 circuit boards. I'll be bringing in the 40 heavy modular frames by drone, and this is where the other half of the computer is. And for the final product, I just need a bunch of assemblers to combine the adaptive control units and supercomputers. So I'll be using 27 assemblers to do that, which is just a great number. Anytime you can work with powers of 2s or 3s, just fantastic. And since the recipe to make the adaptive control units only make 1 per minute, I need 40 manufacturers to make the 40 per minute. But thankfully all of the amounts are so low that we'll be able to load balance this really easily and send them on over to here, which I'm pretty sure I'm going to need to flip all of these around. And to think all of these machines, and I'm bringing in 40 heavy modular frames, which would have taken up quite a bit more space if I had to make these out here as well. So thankfully, I already knocked that out of the way. So that's all the machines placed. Next step is all of the belts, and that's where you're going to see the real craziness come in. After fast forwarding about 20 hours, here we are. I looked at the timestamps at the saves and oh boy, this really did take quite a while. So this should be just about everything belted up, although I know there's an error or two here or there, and I'll point them out if I can remember them. So let me go through some of the belt work. As you can see, I decided to add this to get all of the materials up to the correct floors, and it worked out pretty well. This was not actually the complicated part at all, although some parts got a little bit tricky trying to get them to fit into the right spots so that there was no clipping and it wasn't too chaotic, but this part actually wasn't nearly that bad. So let's start at the bottom, and I'll kind of unfortunately run through probably a whole bunch of numbers. Sorry if this ends up being a little math heavy, but that's a lot of load balancing. So let me show you how I split off some of these things. So with copper sheets, they needed to go to a couple different places. I needed to get 200 split off for the AI limiters. The rest of the 1,804 are all going to circuit boards. Since each of these machines are clocked to 100%, each one puts out 22.5. So 8 times 22.5 is 180. So I'm short 20. So I needed to split off 2.5 from one of these, and this is how we did it. So this is actually two different splits just really close to each other, so just ignore everything past this line. That's the next step. So this right here I thought was really fun and really simple. So if you take 22.5 and you divide it by 9, you get 2.5. So I needed to split off 1/9. The rest of it is all going to get merged up to here. That'll give me my 20, and there's the even 200. We send in the full amount here. We split it 3 ways, so we've got a third or 3/9 on each one. One of those is getting split again all 3 ways, giving us our 1/9 that we can split off right here. So this right here has 2.5, and then the rest of it has the 20 that's merging up with everything else, giving us our 200 belt. This load balancing right here is because of how I decided to split up the copper sheets for the circuit boards. I mentioned it before when I was going over each section, but the way I'm balancing it is there's 4 sections of 16 assemblers. Each one needs 440 of both copper sheets and silica. And unfortunately, 440 isn't quite an even number for the 22.5 that each of these refineries are outputting. So I needed to group up 19 of them, which would give me 427.5, meaning I still need 12.5 for each belt. So since I already know if I split it into 9ths, I can get 2.5, which means that I could get 4 9ths would be 10, and the other 5 9ths would be that 12.5. So I know it's kind of messy, but that's what I ended up doing in a couple different places. So the full amount goes in here, we split it all 3 ways, and then you split the middle one 3 more times. So this is 1/9 on each one. These have 3 9ths essentially, so we've got 4 9ths here, and then 5 9ths on that one. And then obviously I'm using the underneath for a little bit of the logistics, but it's super messy, so let me go over more of this before I go down there. Back here for the copper sheets, I did the same thing. So I just ended up splitting 2 of these so that 12.5 goes that way, 12.5 goes that way, and then the remaining 10 for each one get grouped up together and sent below. The deuterium ingots also needed to go to 2 places. I need 170 for the fused wire. The remaining 403 1/3 go to the fused quick wire. So I've got 14 of them grouped up together, and then we're using this one to kind of split the amount. So with 14, each putting out 12, that's the 160. So I just needed to split off 2 from the last one. Since each of these are putting out 12, getting 2 is really easy. You just need to split it twice. So I split it in half, and then I split it into thirds, giving me my 1/6. The rest of it gets grouped up with all the rest of the refineries, and that's the bigger amount all going to the fused quick wire. Alright, so as you can see, I decided to run all of the outputs underneath and use that logistics floor, and then they're all getting run up there. But the thing is, this is where I did a bit of the load balancing, so let's take a look. So we've got the deuterium coming through here. We've got other copper sheets coming through here. This is basically picking up all of those random amounts that was like 20 from that other one. Those are all getting grouped together. These copper sheets are coming along here. We've got some more fun load balancing here, basically just siphoning off 44. Even though that seems super random, 484 divided by 44 is 11. So that's what this is it's actually splitting it 12 ways and sending one of them back. This is just splitting off 1/11, and the rest of it is the 440 that I need for the circuit boards. With a couple of these, the easiest solution was just to use the smart splitter trick. So these are sending, the priority is to the center and the right. And I just have it where it's got the initial length as Mark 3, a small length to limit it down to 120, and same thing right here so that I can really easily get 240. And I basically just did that twice, and the remainder is 200. So there is no clipping, but yeah. So I really liked being able to use the logistics floor because having all of this up top would have been really messy. So I'm glad I can more or less hide it. And I try to keep it as organized and neat and added relevant signs where I needed them. So for a lot of this is I wanted to get the load balancing done here just to make things easy. Doing it this way does increase the startup time a bit because now instead of sending a Mark IV belt up to the appropriate 4 and then splitting it off, I'm using much slower belts and they're having to go all the way up. But I really like the way it looks, so I really don't mind. So for load balancing the Caterium, I wanted to get 2 groups of 150 and the remaining 103 is for the underclocked machines. So to get 150, pretty easy. I just used the same smart splitter trick, so the priority is left and center. So I'm using a Mark IV belt to make sure that this is a completely full 120 belt. And then same thing here. So this is getting limited down to the Mark I. So I've got 60 going into here. We're splitting that in half, so 30 here, 30 here. 30 plus the 120 gives me my 150. With the remainder going this way, I'm just doing the exact same thing all over again, having the remainder be 103 and a third. While we're down here, I might as well show you all the different load balancing, and then we'll just go up top to the rest of the tower. So down here is where all of the rubber and the plastic is coming in from the train. I'm taking the 360 and the 600 line that I have, and I'm putting it into a 2 to 3 load balancer. So this is just really easy. You just take each of these, put it into a splitter. Each splitter needs to connect to a different merger, and that'll give you 3 equal belts. And if we go back over to kind of where all of the copper is coming in from, I can show you what probably gave me some of my biggest headaches. So I needed to load balance a whole bunch more of the copper ingots to make all the wire in the quick wire. So the way it's all the machines are balanced up top, I need 3 lines of 750 copper ingots, and then the last one has 5/16 and 2/3. And this is one of those things where the machines started up and ran fine at first, but it slowly over time, a bunch of the machines would only run at like 96, 97%. And here's the issue. So the incoming lines for these splits right here, the way this one is working is we're using the smart splitter, send the priority straight, overflow is going to the right. So I thought having half of it be Mark V and then limiting it to the 480, and then we're grouping up with that split right there, because 750 minus the 480, I just need basically 1 Mark III and 1 Mark IV belt to merge. I thought this would be the easiest thing to set up, to be honest, but it was really quite a pain because even this is actually set up a little bit too close together. So the reason for this is this line right here is being split off from one of the top belts, which is only 550 and a third. It's very much not a full Mark V belt. So this amount isn't long enough because every once in a while it would just have a really long gap of no ingots. And then this one would have a gap and it wouldn't be the full 480. And then when you would get the rest of it, it would be sending too many to this middle line. Not by a ton, but a few here and there. Basically the equal amount that these were missing on here. So my next thought was, we'll just move it even farther over. So if I just do a really short amount, then that should be fine, right? In theory, it would be if this was longer. Unfortunately, the gaps would still show up, and this would still end up having gaps on there. So I ended up having to just make really long, dumb things with my belts, like doing something like this sort of a thing. But for some reason, even with this, I still ended up just having kind of weird issues. And the only way I could end up getting around it was using a buffer. So I just had to add a small storage container somewhere down like here. And then it would basically be Mark V in. And then I attached just the Mark IV out that I needed. Obviously, this is it's much cleaner in the final version. I'll show you. But just to give you an example, that's what I had to do to get this to reliably stay consistently at the 480, and then only the correct amount would end up splitting for the overflow. And with this top one, because I needed to split off 2 Mark III belts to complete those 750s, I needed to extend this quite a bit farther to the Mark V, but then this one ended up being fine. So I'm not really sure why I didn't need a buffer on these ones, but I just could not quite get it to work without the buffer on these ones. But hey, eventually I found the simple solution. So I believe there's one more set of load balancing down here. So let's go over there. So here we are at the other end of the factory. This is where the steel pipes and the silica are coming in. For whatever reason, I haven't attached these belts quite yet, but the splits are all done and ready. So the way this is working, these are all the same, but not super convenient numbers to work with. I did have to use the smart splitter trick on these ones. So because I want 440 lines, and these are coming in at 638.5, I went ahead and just did priority straight ahead, overflow to the left. Obviously that one is to the right. And then it's getting limited to Mark IV. So we're working with a 480 belt. And then this split right here is basically splitting off So this right here is splitting off 1/12. So if we split it 3 ways, that's a third, split it in half, that's a sixth, split it in half again, that's 1/12. Leaving us with 440 on top if we recombine all those top ones, and then 40 at the bottom. And if you remember, I need 44 just for one set of 2 assemblers for the circuit boards. And then the remainders are getting grouped up and creating a 750 line for the high-speed connectors. Okay, let's get out of here and show you the rest of the tower. So with most of the floors, it's pretty simple. The inputs are just going through either the center or being brought over, and I decided I would just add a whole bunch of glass frame foundations right above where I'm using the big frame pillars for all of the power. And this gives me a really easy way to bring all of the outputs back to the tower, and then they can go up to the appropriate floors. So I thought this was a great way to deal with it instead of just stacking up a whole bunch of conveyor poles and just making the center just 6 conveyors high. I like doing it this way because I can see both the inputs really easily, and I can go up here and see all of the outputs. So this floor is the crazy floor that has almost 10,000 wire and quick wire leaving. So when this is up and running, it looks pretty awesome. So this right here is probably one of the most interesting things, and one of the other issues that I created that I didn't realize for quite a while. So the idea of this whole thing is I'm taking 4 belts and I'm actually condensing it down to 3. Probably wondering, why didn't I just group up the machines like that? And it's just, was the easiest solution I could think of. So here was the problem. I need 2,240 quick wire for the Caterium computer recipes. And I'm using 24 manufacturers to make those. So they're split into 3 groups of 8. So if I wanted to get these onto 3 belts, that's not a super convenient number to try to load balance right out of the machine. But if I divide this by 4, 560, however, I can get grouped up out of the machines fairly easily. So if I bring together 4 belts of that 560 and condense them down into 3 equal belts, easy peasy. So the issue I had was creating this monstrosity. So I know one of these is wrong, and I can't remember which one. So if I upload this to the Google Drive, I will definitely fix it, because I'm trying to remember. I know one of these Okay. So what I needed to do is each one of these splitters needed one of its outputs to go to one of these heights. It didn't really matter if it's this side or this side, because then they're getting grouped together. So as long as, one of them went to the bottom, one of them went to the middle, one of them went to the top, which side it was on, it didn't matter. I just needed to find a convenient way to place them all. So I believe it's this top one. That one's going to that top, and then this one is also going to the top, which is not right. So I think what I ended up doing was, so now we have this one being sent to the top. The right side is going down to the middle, so I still need one to go into the very bottom. So I'm pretty sure I just added this, and make sure the lift is the right way. We'll just go right above this one. Not necessarily the prettiest thing I've ever built. And to get that into the right spot, I am just going to, I believe, yeah, there we go. All right, just put that there. Sometimes just temporary foundations are the easiest way to do anything. And there we go. Okay, so now that's the correct way for it to be. So that's all the belts for the Caterium computers. A lot of the other belting was super easy. For the circuit boards, I needed 4 belts of 450, and so with each of these outputting 90, that's super easy. Just group up 5, and there you go. Here we are at the next floor. So this is doing the stators and cables. Honestly, there really isn't anything interesting with the load balancing. It's basically just each group of the belts is going to the correct ones. And then since all of this is going to the next floor, it was really easy. So just kind of grouping things up together and then into the correct amounts, because I needed 10 equal belts. So I just had to group them up accordingly. And those come up to this floor, and this floor is taking all of those belts. So each belt down here will have 600 cable. Up here we'll only have 30 stators. And that feeds the 120 assemblers, making the automated wiring. So all of that gets grouped up onto one belt, and that'll go to the very top floor. On to the next floor with the circuit boards and the other electronics. We've got those belts of 440 copper sheets in silica fed into each of their groups of 16 assemblers, and then the small 44 copper sheets and silica are coming to this set of assemblers. And then with this one, because I used that centerpiece for those 2 assemblers, I ran the inputs for the high-speed connectors all the way across just to kind of clean things up. I probably could have ran it underneath too if I wanted, but this seemed the cleanest way to do it because there aren't that many outputs for this floor. And then everything is just load balanced across 4 groups of 5 manufacturers. So I just kind of created a 5-way split pretty easily. Just got to remember to add the stack of mergers, send the 1/6 back, and you've got your 5 equal split. All of these are going to one place, so it just gets grouped up onto one belt. Nice and easy. The circuit boards, I believe half of them are staying on this floor, and they were going to the high-speed connectors. And then the rest of them are getting grouped up together. But there was really no special load balancing for that. On to the second to last floor. Here is our computers, AI limiters, and supercomputers. So AI limiters were one of the real simple ones. I just needed 8 machines, all clocked to 100%. The copper sheets could all get load balanced onto one line, but since I needed 800 quick wire, we've got 400 plugging into these 4, and then the other 400 into these 4. And then the output, they get all grouped together and go over to the supercomputers. With the computers, half of the outputs are going to supercomputers, the other half are going upstairs. So as you can see, they're just already grouped into their 3 belts that they need to be in, and then just plug into each system. And let's move on to the last floor. All right, so the belt work for here was actually really simple. So this is actually the very last step. I wanted the last assemblers to be right here at the edge, and there's the final product, and then that's going to go all the way down and feed into that drone port. So since I'm using 9 sets of this 3 assembler blueprint, that does cover up this centerpiece. So for all of the inputs for the manufacturers back here, I just ran those across the top. So this is the floor that has 40 manufacturers, and they are all load balanced. So since the inputs are all so low, everything is coming in on one belt. So I got to load balance everything equally. I didn't have to plug in separate belts halfway through or anything like that. So it just obviously gets split in half right at the beginning. That goes over here, and then we feed 2 halves. So from there, I split it 5 ways, and each of those are then splitting into 2. So instead of doing the 5-way split last, I'm doing it sooner, and I think it looks really cool. So both halves are pretty much identical. We'll have everything flowing real nicely. And then it all gets grouped together, comes around the outside, comes back in over here, and plugs in. And that's how we get our adaptive control units. Whew, that makes me tired just going all over it again. But that is all the belt work done. So the last step is to turn this beast on. We're down here at the train station where I've got my priority power switch set up. So let's take a look. Nice rock solid steady power graph. And oh my, we are about to eat up so much of that available power. But that's why we made it. So let's flip the switch and watch this come to life. And now that the wire has made it up to this floor, I need to bring in that rubber so we can make that cable. So let's go to the train station and turn off those things. And by turn off, let's delete them. I'm gonna leave the plastic sinking for now. That's one of the very last things we need to do. I added 1 sink, even though realistically I should have added a whole bunch more, but I didn't want to. So that was the only one, and I'm going to go through and just take out a lot of the extras from a lot of these machines instead of having it back up all the way to the other assemblers. I'd rather keep everything moving. And now that the high-speed connectors have made it to the manufacturers, let's go back downstairs to the train station and turn on the plastic. There we are. the first assembly director systems. Ooh, this was quite the project. And it's going to take a few more minutes for everything to get completely ramped up, especially this last row. And after a very long journey, the assembly director systems make it to the drone port. And now, let me show you where they're going. Ah, back in the grassy fields. I so rarely come here now that I can get everything delivered. But here is the space elevator, and I decided to build a little drone port around it because it had enough space being inside this little roundabout. So I thought this was a fun way to bring in all of the space elevator parts for this last phase. As you'll notice, we've got 5 drone ports, even though there's only 4 parts, and the reason for that is this one right here is making the short journey right back over to the main storage to grab some batteries. So once I power this on, it'll take off and go get some batteries to feed the rest of them. So for this drone port, the way this is going to work, once we flip the switch, it's going to go grab a load of the assembly director systems. Those will come on down here and into this storage unit. So I've got the lift going into a merger, and the reason is we've got a Mark 1 belt coming out of here, splitting it all 3 ways, so 20, 20, and 20. So I'm looping back 40 back into this merger and into the storage so that I can have a nice steady flow of the 20 per minute, which is what I'm making. It goes into a smart splitter. Priority is to the left, so those are going to go around, out here, and into the space elevator. Once that fills up, then it's going to go straight over here and into the final sink. So I felt like putting it a little bit off just so we can see a nice little parade of all the space elevator items. So for now, that's only going to be a third full with 20 a minute on there. But eventually, as we finish more of the space elevator parts, we'll get this nice and full and we can just see all of those points piling up. And now finally, the last step. Let's plug this up and we'll give it a few minutes and then we'll see the drones drop everything off. Alright, and our drone is back. And as you can see, the battery one had much shorter distance to go, so we've already got those loading up into the drone ports. And there they go, the parade of the first ones going into the space elevator. Ah, feels good. And if you've gotten this far yourself in the game, you'll know this is actually one of the harder of the last space elevator parts to do. So I'm glad that I got this out of the way and it didn't completely ruin me. But this game file is, I think, over 20 megabytes now. So saves are a little bit longer, loading's a little bit longer, but we're making good progress. So that is 20 assembly director systems per minute headed to the space elevator. That is mission complete. So if we take a look, that very last sink right here is the only thing that's not on, which I definitely could have rerouted the power, but once this is full, the steady 20 per minute, I actually think we'll keep that on. So I'm just going to leave it. It's the only 30 that's not on right now, so everything else is good, and I have very little space left, so power is very much going to have to be the next thing. Because this very last power plant is going to be way more than I need, which means it's going to take a while. I'm going to try to split it up into a couple videos. So look forward to that, and thanks for watching.